Domestic helpers in Hong Kong are at the center of a growing labor rights movement that's capturing attention across the city and beyond. The Domestic Helpers Union is pushing hard to raise the minimum salary to 6,670 Hong Kong dollars per month, sparking a heated debate about fair wages, worker dignity, and the true value of care work in one of Asia's most expensive cities. To understand why this matters, we need to look at the numbers. Hong Kong is home to approximately 370,000 foreign domestic workers, making it one of the largest employers of migrant domestic labor in the world. The vast majority of these workers come from the Philippines and Indonesia, though there are also helpers from Thailand, India, Sri Lanka, and other countries. These women, and they are predominantly women, form an invisible backbone that keeps countless Hong Kong households running smoothly. Their work is extensive and demanding. They care for children from infancy through adolescence, often becoming deeply attached parental figures in their lives. They look after elderly family members who need constant attention, medication management, and companionship. They cook multiple meals a day, clean apartments and houses, do laundry, grocery shopping, and handle countless other household tasks. Many work 6 or 7 days a week, with their duties starting early in the morning and ending late at night. Despite living with their employers, a requirement under Hong Kong law, they often have minimal privacy and limited personal time. Yet despite this essential and exhausting work, domestic helpers remain one of the most vulnerable and underpaid groups of workers in Hong Kong. The current minimum allowable wage, which is set by the government and reviewed periodically, has not kept pace with the city's notoriously high cost of living. Hong Kong consistently ranks as one of the most expensive cities in the world, with soaring costs for food, transportation, and basic necessities. This is where the union's campaign becomes crucial. The call for a minimum wage of 6,770 Hong Kong dollars per month isn't arbitrary. This figure has been carefully calculated based on several factors: the inflation rate over recent years, the rising cost of basic goods and services, transportation expenses, and the need for workers to save money and send remittances home to their families. For many domestic helpers, supporting family members back home is their primary motivation for working abroad. They're often the main breadwinners, paying for siblings' education, parents' medical care, and household expenses in their home countries. But there's another financial burden that many people don't realize these workers carry: recruitment agency fees. Many domestic helpers arrive in Hong Kong already in debt, having paid substantial fees to agencies in their home countries for the privilege of securing employment. These fees can amount to several months' salary, meaning workers often spend their first year or more just paying off this debt before they can start saving or sending significant money home. The union argues that the current wage structure essentially traps workers in a cycle of financial vulnerability. When you factor in the cost of phone cards to call home, toiletries, occasional medical expenses not covered by insurance, and the need to save for emergencies or their eventual return home, the current minimum wage leaves little room for financial security or dignity. This campaign also shines a light on broader issues of labor rights and social justice. Domestic work has historically been undervalued across the globe. Because it happens in private homes rather than public workplaces, and because it's traditionally been considered women's work, it's often seen as less skilled or less important than other forms of labor. This is despite the fact that domestic helpers need to be skilled in multiple areas: childcare, elder care, cooking, household management, and often even basic medical care. The intersection of gender, migration, and class makes domestic workers particularly vulnerable to exploitation. Many come from economically disadvantaged backgrounds in their home countries and see foreign domestic work as one of the few available paths to economic mobility. This power imbalance between employers and employees can lead to situations where workers feel unable to advocate for themselves, fear losing their jobs and visa status, or endure poor working conditions because they have limited alternatives. Hong Kong's live-in requirement adds another layer of complexity. Unlike many other countries where domestic workers can live independently and work set hours, Hong Kong requires foreign domestic helpers to live with their employers. While this arrangement has some benefits, no rent to pay, meals typically provided, it also means workers have less autonomy, limited privacy, and often unclear boundaries between work time and personal time. How do you clock out when you live at your workplace? The union's push for 6,770 HKD represents more than just a number. It's a statement that domestic work is real work that deserves fair compensation. It's a demand for recognition that these workers contribute enormously to Hong Kong's economy and society. When domestic helpers care for children and elderly family members, they enable other adults in the household to work outside the home, contributing to Hong Kong's productivity and economic output. This care work has tangible economic value, even if it's not always acknowledged. Of course, this wage increase proposal hasn't been welcomed by everyone. There's significant resistance from various quarters. Some employers, particularly middle-class families, express concern about the financial burden of higher wages. They argue that many Hong Kong families are themselves struggling with high living costs, expensive housing, and economic uncertainty. For families where both parents work and rely on a domestic helper to manage childcare and household duties, a wage increase could strain already tight budgets. There are also concerns about regional competition. Some employers and policy analysts argue that if Hong Kong's minimum wage for domestic helpers becomes significantly higher than neighboring countries or territories, workers might choose to seek employment elsewhere, or employers might look to other arrangements. This could potentially disrupt a system that has worked, however imperfectly, for decades. Business groups sometimes push back as well, arguing that wage increases should be modest and gradual to avoid shocking the system. They point to economic downturns, unemployment rates among Hong Kong residents, and the need to balance various competing interests. But advocates for domestic workers counter these arguments forcefully. They point out that fair wages shouldn't be negotiable, and that the current system essentially subsidizes Hong Kong families' lifestyles on the backs of vulnerable migrant workers. They argue that if families cannot afford to pay fair wages for domestic work, then perhaps they need to reconsider their arrangements or seek alternative solutions, rather than perpetuating an exploitative system. Labor rights organizations emphasize that domestic helpers aren't asking for luxury. They're asking for enough money to live with dignity, support their families, and save for their futures. They note that many other workers in Hong Kong have seen wage increases that reflect cost of living adjustments, and domestic helpers deserve the same consideration. There's also a moral dimension to this debate. What does it say about a society when the people who care for its most vulnerable members, children and the elderly, are themselves among the most economically vulnerable? What message does it send when care work, which is essential to human flourishing and social functioning, is valued so much less than other forms of labor? The outcome of this campaign will have significant implications far beyond just the immediate wage increase. It will set a precedent for how Hong Kong treats migrant workers and whether the government is willing to prioritize labor rights and social justice. It will influence how other countries and regions approach domestic worker wages and protections. And it will send a message to the hundreds of thousands of domestic helpers in Hong Kong about whether their work, their dignity, and their well-being truly matter to the society they serve. What's particularly noteworthy about this moment is that domestic helpers are organizing and speaking up for themselves more than ever before. Historically, these workers have been isolated, working in individual homes with limited ability to connect with others in similar situations. But unions, advocacy groups, and community organizations have created spaces for domestic helpers to come together, share experiences, and collectively demand better treatment. Social media has also played a role, allowing workers to connect, organize, and raise awareness about their issues. Every Sunday, Hong Kong's public spaces fill with domestic helpers on their day off. In Central, around Statue Square and surrounding areas, thousands gather to socialize, share meals, attend religious services, and simply enjoy their one day of freedom. These gatherings have become not just social occasions, but also spaces for organizing and activism. Union representatives distribute information, workers share their stories, and a sense of collective identity and purpose builds. The push for 6,770 HKD is part of a longer struggle for dignity, recognition, and fair treatment. It's about acknowledging that the women who wake up early to prepare breakfast for Hong Kong's children, who patiently help elderly residents through their daily routines, who keep homes clean and organized, who provide emotional labor and care alongside physical work, these women deserve to be paid fairly for their